First off, I'd like to express my condolences to the families of Pa Ben. He was always here in our press conferences, and honestly, some of the best shots of the Council of Ministers and some of my best personal photos were taken by him. He will be sorely missed. Likewise, to the family of Roy Marlin. I've known Roy since the time he was Commissioner of Tourism, and we did quite a lot together when I was in my role as SHTA and he was Commissioner of Tourism. And from that time, I've always called him Commish. But in terms of moving the tourism industry together on this island, we've done so much. And actually, Roy was very much responsible for my entry into politics, actually. It was Roy who approached me about joining and actually putting my name on a list. And, as I became a minister, he was often in cabinet to help to give advice. And in my opinion, there's very few individuals who knew and understood government as well as Roy Marlin. And again, his advice over the years, his friendship will be sorely missed. I have two topics to speak about. I just returned this weekend attending a conference in Miami, the CHRIS conference, or Caribbean Hotel and Resort Investment Summit. I went in my capacity as Deputy Prime Minister because actually they had invited the Prime Minister to attend, but because of other commitments that she had, I attended on her behalf. They had asked me to come to participate on a panel for a discussion about building a better tomorrow after a natural disaster, a government's perspective. Was on a distinguished panel with members from the U.S. Virgin Islands, British Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Anguilla, and Haiti. It was an excellent conference, actually attended as well by the Secretary General of TIAT, Miguel de Wever. And although I was there just for the panel discussion, of course, we attended all of the shows, all of the meetings, all of the conferences, and an opportunity to network with the participants. And it turned out, I think, to be an extremely beneficial, productive event. We met representatives from Hilton, who are looking at the possibility of flagging a property here. Apple Leisure Group, which is a vertically integrated company, it's becoming quite a powerhouse in the tourism industry, who's also looking at a management contract here. Construction companies who are being asked to bid on reconstruction projects in St. Martin, so it's an opportunity for them to get a feeling for, what is the labor market like? Can we find workers? If we need to apply for permits, how would that work? Are there incentives, housing issues? So it was really a very good opportunity to speak to a number of potential contractors that may be participating in the reconstruction process in St. Martin, representatives from World Bank, as well as a number of suppliers. There's obviously a lot of construction supply companies, windows, doors, air conditioning companies, who are interested in supplying materials for the rebuilding process in St. Martin. We asked them as well to say, look, not only look for distribution of your product, but one of the best ways, I believe, to sell product is to educate the public. And so we've asked if they would be interested in coming and helping to educate the consumers in St. Martin in terms of different products. I've seen, and I mentioned this in the conference, I've seen windows and doors, a sliding glass door that easy could be $8,000 door, put in with $15 worth of fasteners, so of course the thing blew in after Irma. So although you bought a very expensive door, if they're not properly installed, it really doesn't matter. So I thought it was very interesting. They're willing to come and host different educational seminars on the island. As well met with representatives from Sunwing. As you know, Sunwing has purchased the Great Bay Hotel. They're looking at redeveloping. As a matter of fact, they had representatives in St. Martin just earlier this month speaking to the Ministry of Romy about permitting process. So, I was very encouraged. It looks as if there's quite some movements in terms of reconstruction from a private sector perspective for the country. Some interesting points from the conference. Puerto Rico has just enacted a Tourism Incentive Act, so other countries in the Caribbean are looking to see what can they do to incentivize and stimulate the tourism industry. Everyone from private sector there really emphasized the fact that government's participation as a facilitator in the reconstruction process is critical. All of them stressed that locations that have good airlift are of primary interest to them from an investment perspective. So, the news in the paper just yesterday about Nagico and the airport going to court, in my opinion, is sad. I always think that court should be last resort, that should be after you've exhausted all possibilities for negotiations, dialogue, and mediation. So, and of course, Anguilla in our discussions stressed that they're so dependent on St. Martin for airlift. So I think we have responsibility to our neighbors, to ourselves, to really ensure that the airport is operational as soon as possible. Many of the investors spoke about not just returns on investment. So this is obviously post-hurricanes, speaking about maximum risk-adjusted returns. So what they're trying to say is they're not just looking at a simple business model. Their business model, their business plan, their numbers, they're also adjusting it based on risk. So the better our infrastructure, the fact that we've put our electricity and water underground means that they have less risk. So all of these factors are being taken into account by investors when they're trying to decide where they're going to invest their money. So again, there's a lot we can learn from each other, from our neighbors in the Caribbean, what they've been doing, what their success stories are, what their failures have been. It's always been my belief that we can learn as much from what other people have done right as well as what they've done wrong. So all in all, a very productive trip. And by the way, to the Minister of Finance, as a matter of fact, during my entire term as minister, the past 2+ years, have always lived by your travel policy that you're proposing within as your cost-saving measures. So basically meaning that for flights less than 5 hours, this minister always flies economy. And I still have good connections in the tourism industry, so always work with negotiated hotel rates, always a good price. I'm a bargain shopper. So Minister of Finance, walking the walk. Next topic I'd like to touch on is from a labor perspective, a work permitting perspective. Clearly, the ministry in the aftermath of Hurricane Irma is doing all the best that it can to make sure that our people are included in the reconstruction process. This includes a number of activities that we've been executing, a number of registration or employment drives. As a matter of fact, any larger projects that are looking to import workers, we always encourage them that they need to do registration drives, employment drives, training sessions to try and make sure that our people have opportunities to participate in our reconstruction economy. There's a number of training programs that are in place. The White and Yellow Cross has basically an internship type program where people can get paid to work and learn on the job. NEPA, of course, and we sent a number of individuals to Trinidad for training. But it is clear that there are still insufficient numbers of skilled laborers on the local market to address the demands for skilled construction workers for our recovery process. Therefore, the ministry is making use of Article 7, Paragraph 3 of the National Decree containing general measures on the employment of foreign labor. This allows the minister to grant a one-time employment permit for construction professionals on a specific project basis. There are some requirements to that, and I'll read through the requirements. The business must have a valid labor registration. The business must register the vacancies on www.jobopportunity.sx. There's the possibility that, especially now for construction jobs, that we would consider waiving the 5-week period. Normally, you have to advertise and then wait 5 weeks before you can submit your work permit applications. we're looking at, based on the fact that we've done a number of activities to try and find local laborers and have not found that there is a lot of labor available, that we would consider waiving the 5-week waiting period before they could submit applications. A completed employment permit application form and overview of education, payment of all taxes to the business, payment of the applicable processing fee to the government of St. Martin, a statement of guarantee of housing for non-nationals signed off by the registered owner of the business. And actually, it was very interesting. One of the points that we spoke about in the investment conference was that as companies are looking at the possibility of bringing in relatively large numbers of foreign labor, we want to ensure that that doesn't distort our housing market. We already have very limited housing. And so if we're bringing in construction workers who are obviously going to be working full-time, we want to ensure that they don't harm our local rental market, because we don't really want them competing with our rental market, driving up prices and making issues for locals to find affordable housing. So this is an important topic for discussion as we look at bringing in people. How are they going to be housed? Where are they going to be housed? Copies of passports of non-nationals tied to the project, copies of flight itineraries, copies of certificate, diplomas, and qualifications. All of these need to be translated by a legally registered translator if the documents are not already in English, and credentials of that legally documented translator. Complete construction plans mentioning the duration of the project. So the idea is that we would be able to give one-time permits for people that are participating on a project basis for the reconstruction of a particular project. We believe that we are striking a good balance between stimulating the recovery process and with protecting our local labor market. One of the aspects of this is that because the permits are project-based, we don't anticipate that these workers will remain after the project is completed, and thereby and again, distorting our local labor market. So that's important that we protect our local labor market, but that we also stimulate the reconstruction process. And of course, the ministry will continue with the initiatives and programs already in place to train locals in reconstruction trades to ensure that they can participate in our reconstruction economy. So, and on a note, although this is targeted towards projects, we also recognize that there are companies that have been established, construction companies, but this may even apply to IT companies, air conditioning technicians. All of these are still related to the reconstruction process. And certainly the ministry is very sensitive to the fact that if we do not respond quickly, timely, give answers quickly, that will impact the supply of labor available for our reconstruction process. And so the ministry is committed to doing whatever we can to facilitate, speed up, ease the requirements, the process for getting work permits. So again, the message to the community is there's no reason for you not to apply for work permits. The ministry recognizes the need for reconstruction labor, and we are doing all we can to facilitate that process. And making sure that people are registered and properly insured and paying their taxes is an important part of our reconstruction process as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Lee, for your opening remarks. At this time, I first acknowledge the presence of our Minister of Education, Culture, Youth, and Sport, the Honorable Urine Reuter, and at this time invite her to address you at this time.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Peterson. I haven't been at the press briefing, I believe, for 2 weeks. Good morning, and especially a good morning to the members of the press. It is a bit unfortunate that I indeed have to start off on a somber note, as we, of course, acknowledge that we lost not one, but two very instrumental figures in St. Martin. And I've understood from other family members and friends that even lost other loved ones as well. So we are indeed in trying times. Mr. Roland Bryson, of course, MIPA Ben has been very significant and unique for St. Martin's cultural heritage, storytelling and performing arts, and therefore relevant to my ministry. Roland was often front and center here at our weekly press briefing, and always with a smile. I will personally and sincerely miss him. He had a special place in my heart, and I extend genuine condolences to his family. And I know that the artistic contributions will be developed to keep his memory and art form alive. I know that creative artists came together to prepare for a tribute, and who knows, it might indeed also be possible to catalogue and have Paben together with other artists recognized either during their lifetime or thereafter. Mr. Roy Marlin was a wonderful man, and during my 2 campaign seasons, Roy was one person in particular that would seek me out to offer advice and give critique when necessary. His favorite one-liner to me was, "Go hard or go home." It was favorite, and I'm sure that many of us have heard that one-liner. He was known for his dedication and steadfastness. He mentored many new and young aspiring politicians, never holding on to his wisdom and that he gained over the many years. I deeply enjoyed the time that I worked with him throughout the last more than 20 years. And therefore, on my behalf and on behalf of my cabinet, I would like to give my condolences to his family, his wife Vivian, his daughter Gillian, his son Ashton, and especially, of course, to Quinton, who works as a member of my cabinet team. And he often shared the insights that his father holds. We mourn with him and the rest of his families and friends. Now, of course, and everybody, I'm sure, even though I was a bit late, emphasized indeed that in just about 9 days, we will be entering indeed the 2018 hurricane season. And when we were sworn in on January 15, one of the main tasks that we as interim team had was, in addition to orchestrating the recovery process, it was indeed to ensure, to prepare our island that we indeed would safely go through yet another hurricane season. I think every minister, myself included, has hit indeed unexpected challenges, roadblocks, and some setbacks in our recovery plans for our respective individual ministries. We are not where we thought or as far along as we wanted to be. I am encouraged, however, by what my ministry has accomplished. They worked tirelessly, just like every other staff within the ministry thus far. And what we have in the pipelines in the weeks ahead will hopefully come to fruition in the month of June. Our main priority in these coming weeks, therefore, will be to finalize disaster preparedness programs, organize trainings and drills for personnel and staff, and of course facilitate the further and push the further repairs of as many schools, cultural and sports facilities as we can, to make them as least vulnerable to the hurricane season ahead of us. In that light, the ministry has just completed a few critical documents and actions that ensures that we are one more important step closer to where we want to be. As minister, I've signed off on Safety and Emergency Management Committee to be established within my ministry, and also I signed off on the introduction and implementation of a safety and emergency response guidelines for our schools. Lessons learned through the disaster of Hurricane Irma last September highlight the importance of creating indeed a culture of safety and strengthening the structures of emergency preparedness and disaster management in the education sector. The Safety and Emergency Management Committee will become the main organization within this ministry tasked with overseeing the development, the immediate implementation, and long-term maintenance of safety and emergency management for the MECI's respective sectors, in all sectors, of course, primarily education, but also cultural organizations and the sports facilities that were heavily impacted as well. The committee's main task, therefore, will be to establish a comprehensive school safety framework, create and maintain plans for disaster preparedness and emergency responses, and manage any crisis within their sectors. Of course, the position of the Secretary General has been recognized. I'm very thankful to our Prime Minister and the ability that we now have to join in preparedness stages as part of the Emergency Operating Center, and that will help to assist the flow of communication and effective coordination that we need in those stages. In a previous press conference, I went into a little on the safety and emergency response guidelines for the schools, but indeed to quickly recap, the aim of this document is to create, as I mentioned, indeed a culture of safety within the education sector, and to ensure that we have minimum guidelines for safety and emergency response planning in schools. The guidelines are limited to the most common hazards like medical emergencies, fire, natural disasters such as hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, and floods. This will be the first step towards the development of a larger, comprehensive schools safety framework, and it has also been assisted by UNICEF. And that framework should take into account more complex and long-term issues as well, related to, for instance, building standards of our schools, disaster risk reduction education, and green and sustainable approach to school design and management. The guidelines highlight a variety of steps. It is a very comprehensive document, for instance, 6 steps that the schools would have to follow. And just to highlight, it is for all schools relevant to establish the school safety and emergency team per school. To also create awareness among the school community, including the parents, of things that have to be considered and prepared for. They also have to identify all hazards and resources necessary and to indeed respond to an emergency. They also have to prepare the school safety and emergency plan document per school and train accordingly and disseminate the plan and conduct, as I mentioned, mock drills on a regular basis, because then it's easier to practice. And they also are required, as a very important vital 6th step, to evaluate and update the plan where necessary. And once we have these frameworks instituted, it makes it so much easier for the Inspectorate of Education to also follow up to the consistent practice of these plans by the school managers and their respective staff. You've also, of course, seen the use of temporary schools, the so-called pavilion tents. We've seen 3 that were set up a couple of months ago in St. Peter's and by the Methodist Agogic Center, and also here in town for the CBA, for Charles Brookes Academy. And as, of course, the hurricane season approaches, my cabinet, with my guidance, has initiated the process of finalizing how these 3 donated pavilion tents will be dismantled before the next hurricane season, because they cannot endure any hurricane category 1, I am sure. The erection and dismantling of the tents is an extremely technical process, and we have enlisted the assistance of a staff member of the Vromi Ministry, who were on hand as the tents were also already assembled by the Dutch company Intertent last year. It was our original intention to have all tents taken down by June 1st, of course, as the start of the hurricane season. However, the Methodist Agogic Center school in St. Peter's has asked for permission to continue to use their tent for the rest of the school year until July 1st, to which I, of course, have agreed, because otherwise it would disrupt and would bring them in jeopardy and at risk with indeed a variety of classrooms that they use. The tent currently housing the Charles Brookes Academy, as you know, has endured many challenges, also due to the dump and the fire. And therefore they have requested and are starting the process to vacate that school by early next week and over the weekend, as they move to a new location at the Kennegreter Street. The 3rd tent in St. Peter's was never fully utilized, so that can be dismantled as well, and the procedures are now ongoing to ensure that we do that in a proper manner, that we safeguard those tents, and that we can also discuss the manner in which we can continue to use these tents in case we have certain type of emergencies or non-emergency related or other activities or cultural activities or other festive occasions. It was a great gift, and we have to make sure that we use the capital well, as it was donated by the Ministry of Education in the Netherlands. Everybody also knows, and maybe you have some of your children partaken in exams. It is the exam season, and it is in full swing as 509 foundation-based education candidates of primary schools and 549 secondary school candidates sit their exams. That's more than 1,000 of our students. The head of the inspectorate has indicated and informed me that the exams are going well. And as usual, of course, students displayed mixed feelings, sometimes varying from anxiety to nervousness, or sometimes indeed the excitement. It has been, of course, we shouldn't underestimate, it has been a challenging year for students and as well of the teachers, as many schools went through quite a bit of unsettlement and with evacuated students returning at various times to the island post-Irma. There are students both at primary as well as secondary level who have been absent for various reasons, with the most common reason being, of course, sometimes related to medical situations. These students will be indeed scheduled for resits in the weeks ahead. The FBE exit examination results will be released by the Division of Exams later on in June, and I'm sure everybody is excited and eager to await the results and to be able to compare them in comparison to the outcomes of last year, to be able to understand to what extent, of course, for instance, this season has negatively impacted the studying and the performance of our students. I am pleased in the way that the exams were able to be facilitated in the wake of the shortage of classroom space, for instance. There is great collaboration between the management and staff of the secondary schools and the Division of Examinations to ensure a successful examination period in 2018. Another subject is maybe a little bit outside the scope of recovery or regular matters, but I believe also something to be proud of. That is the iStep, an ICT and education project coordinated and executed by an appointed team within the Ministry of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport, and especially targeting the public schools. It has been organizing and providing training since February 2017 to classroom teachers and school management representatives on the island. The project at this phase is primarily focused on the deployment of ICT devices within the public schools classrooms. This year, iStep is broadening the scope of trainings to include specialized training teachers within our educational system, and I was very, very pleased to hear about this. It, for instance, started with indeed the inclusion of also physical education teachers and music teachers. And iStep will also continue training for the iStep pilot teachers in all schools and some classes to ensure effective implementation of ICT in classrooms of the public schools in order to get closer to our 21st learning experience that children so dearly need. A number of trainings have already taken place in the past week and will continue into the next week. We were very fortunate to have special trainers with us, Scott Kendrick, a physical education teacher and educational technology trainer in the United States, demonstrated that the physical education teachers present how indeed they can use those IT devices in their classes. For instance, how they can work with students and explain how you can monitor your heart rate, or how you can use iPads in classroom instructions. And Amy Burns, she's a different seasoned educator who has also written several books and received several awards on the integration of ICT in music education, will indeed also continue to help participants and students learn a variety of apps and teaching tools to enhance their music classroom instruction. It's wonderful how we indeed change our style and move ahead. And it's wonderful to see how then students further can engage and therefore enhance their performance. I've just highlighted a few on the ongoing initiatives that are taking place within the ministry. And in addition, ongoing conversations have continued with the WITU and the Busing Association, where some very positive developments will be shared in the week ahead. There continues to be different training, seminars, conferences hosted and attended by the MECI staff to continue on our quest of recovery and resiliency. We continue to be vigilant in identifying different sources of revenue in addition to indeed the payout and the claim settlement for our insurances, and indeed the availability of the trust fund that is now established to rebuild and restore our cultural and sports facilities. I'm always adamant to not forget sport. And that is this tendency. I've mentioned a couple of times that I believe that we should consider a junior minister for sport, because this ministry is sometimes so overwhelming, and the educational sector is so critical and important that we sometimes consider it a byproduct, and which I definitely want to avoid from happening. And therefore, I wanted to close off also with some highlights that I've supported some incidental subsidies, even though of course, we are very much aware about our financial circumstances and the fact that we have to be very cautious and rethink and reconsider subsidies. I dearly support sports organizations, and I hope everybody joins with me. So therefore, I've supported the preparation of advices related to incidental subsidies for the St. Maarten Olympic Federation, the Boxing Association, and also for the Netball Association. We shouldn't underestimate the importance of the St. Maarten Sports and Olympic Federation. They've submitted their request on February 21st, 2018 to the government to indeed assist with subsidy, to assist with their St. Maarten Promising Athletes program. Their financial report was indeed submitted and was reviewed, and while they requested over $50,000, we have at least been able to secure half, and I've supported the availability of an incidental subsidy of over 49,000 guilders. At that time, the budget 2018 was not formally established. I know there might be some possibilities to fund some additional activities, but it is very critical to understand that indeed we have several sports that will participate on an Olympic level, and therefore will indeed have to and have been qualified and will continue for the Barranquilla, Colombia qualifying Central American and Caribbean games. And these sports include athletics, aquatics, triathlon, cycling, and judo. And we have, for instance, some athletes, just to highlight them: Michelangelo Bell for judo, Sharmar Thomas for swimming, Wilfred Chittick for cycling, Jolion Ferron for sailing, Christy Stein for sailing, and Gart Stein for sailing. So I know that the foundation, the federation, is further seeking qualification for a few more athletes within the categories of judo and triathlon, and this will be done within the upcoming championships and qualifiers that they will participate in. But those athletes that I just mentioned will already advance and will participate in Colombia in July, and I hope that the entire community will support them, will look out for them, will cheer them in their participation and their tournaments. I've also supported an incidental subsidy for the St. Maarten Netball Association. They will also participate in qualifying games in Barbados from August 22nd to September 5th. And we also supported the travel of 12 of their athletes to also ensure that indeed we continue to build these wonderful talents. And it is a display of our resiliency to ensure that these athletes can continue to partake in these type of not only regional but also international qualifying games. Well, I believe that is what I would like to share. I'm of course open for any type of further questions. I hope that I've ended on a high note. It is very important, as I mentioned, to continue to support our youth, and through examples of sports federations, associations, and tournaments, I hope that we display our ability to get back to the normalcy that we all so desire. Thank you so much. I'm ready for questions.
Thank you very much, Minister Reuter, for your opening remarks. Our next speaker to address you, I now invite the Minister responsible for General Affairs and Prime Minister, the Honorable Leona Romeo Marlin.
Good morning to all colleagues, ministers, and members of the press. I would like to also start this morning notices with conveying my condolences to the family and friends of my friend and family member, Mr. Roy Marlin, on behalf of the government and people of St. Martin. We have lost yet another political heavyweight. And I smiled as I heard the words of go hard or go home, especially coming from the character of Roy Marlin himself, who often rendered advice to my person before and during my political career. Mr. Marlin had made his mark on this political arena on St. Martin with his contributions as a civil servant, board member at NVGB, Island Council member, commissioner in the Executive Council, and member of Parliament. The public of St. Martin can sign the condolence register in his remembrance that is located in the lobby of the Government Administration Building until this Friday, May 25th. The people of St. Martin has lost also a cultural icon in the person of Roland Bryson, aka Paben, or Me Paben. Mr. Bryson is a recently retired civil servant, and that's how I actually know his age, that rendered years of service to the government of St. Martin in his capacity as an employee at the Hygiene and Communications Department. Old man Paben, Mr. Bryson thrilled and entertained crowds locally and internationally with his performance with the Coal Bay Theatre Company. And additionally, over the years, Paben became a cultural fixture with its numerous contributions and love for annual carnival festivities. His last remark to me in here was, Miss Marlin, I have a lot of pictures of you, but you need to raise your head up so I can take that picture. So when sitting here in the Council of Ministers meetings, in the press briefing, I often, when I see him, have to lift my head up because he always reminded me of such so he can take pictures. He indeed will be dearly missed. To his family, co-workers, and friends, I extend my deepest condolences, especially to his co-workers of DCOM and the staff of DCOM. I wish each of you much strength during this time of bereavement. I would like to also inform the public that the recruitment of the National Recovery Bureau program has started, and the vacancy for the director position can be found on the government's website. Within short, the other vacancies will be published on the website, the government info page, and through social media in the coming weeks. I have also requested for these vacancies to be published via the St. Martin House in the Netherlands, allowing our St. Martin professionals the opportunity to apply for these positions as well. I encourage everyone, and especially young St. Martiners, to keep an eye out for these vacancies. The National Recovery Program Bureau will be responsible for the implementation of the recovery and resilience projects that will be financed by the World Bank Trust Fund. It will be headed by a director who is responsible for approximately 20 staff members, including financial management specialists, procurement specialists, safeguard specialists, and individual project leaders. All of these positions will be recruited in a transparent manner and in accordance with World Bank procedures. The success of the Bureau will be essential for the recovery process, so I'm calling on all the bright minds of St. Martin that may be on the island or off the island to consider applying for a position within the Bureau. In addition, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all civil servants and external stakeholders who participated in the consultation of the National Recovery and Resilience Plan last week. The NRRP will provide a roadmap of the recovery process and will offer a detailed overview of the different recovery and resilience needs in the short, medium, and long term. The National Recovery and Resilience Plan will not provide a list of projects that will be financed by the World Bank Trust Fund, but it will function as the key body to make the difficult choices on what the available funding will be spent on. And as stated before, difficult choices lie ahead because the damage that remains far exceeds the scope of the trust fund. As I did last week, I want to re-emphasize and ask the public to also do their part and start making personal plans for their immediate family and community in preparation for the hurricane season. This information in preparation should cover personal emergency family planning that takes into account the well-being of their children, household emergency supplies, pets, all insurances, safeguarding important documents, and access to communication resources. Persons are also reminded to be vigilant and act responsibly by avoiding the spread of information that does not originate from official government sources. And in preparation for the hurricane season, I would like to also announce that together with the Ministry of VROMI and VSA, the inspection of specific shelters has begun as of yesterday. The shelters are being inspected for any possible damages, and we're asking ourselves, the assessments will include, are they ready to be used for the next season? And alternative shelters are being researched in preparation for the hurricane season. These are my updates for today, and I now await the questions from the media. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for your opening remarks. If you're just joining us, you're viewing and listening to the Council of Ministers press briefing for today, Wednesday, May 23rd, 2018. I'd like to open the floor for any questions the media might have. Stephen Cerillion, PJD2, PJD3, 1027. Good morning. You have the floor.
Prime Minister, Ministers, good morning. Thanks, Cedric. My question is for the Minister of Finance and or Minister of Justice. The license plates, as has been said to be picked up by the Ministry of Finance, one would want to believe time is fast approaching for that. Need to know, is the deadline set still in place? How many of those plates have been picked up, and how much has been generated from the plates overall?
Good morning. Stephen, I'm sorry, I do not have that information readily available. I can make a call while someone else answers other questions, but I'll get that for you right away. But indeed, the deadline is coming up now. We had given a period of respite, if you will, through June. So by July 1, we expect everyone that is on the road with a car that is registered on Dutch St. Martin to be to have the correct plate on there and be in correct condition to be on the road of Dutch St. Martin, and I'm assuming the same on French St. Martin. But the amount that have been collected up to now, paid for up to now, I will find out right now and get back to you before the end of this period.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for your question, Stephen. Alida, Daily Herald, good morning. You have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, Cedric. Good morning, Prime Minister, members of the Council of Ministers. Minister of Labor, you announced this morning that government, of course, will look into the issuance of one-time permits. Has government established approximately how many permits will be necessary, how much that may bring into the coffers of government? How would you guarantee that the workers leave at the end of the process? And how do you ensure that the housing market does not have a uncapable spike in prices?
Thank you, Alida. We don't know how many, I didn't quite get all your questions, how many permits?
Do you have now?
So far, we have requests in for one project. I don't recall the number. I would guess 100, 150 workers. The normal work permit fees apply, so there's a combination of supervisors, regular workers, so the normal work permit fees are applicable, so multiply that by the number of workers. As I mentioned in my opening statements, by using this clause that we're talking about, it is for a project base, and the employer needs to guarantee that the people leave when the project is completed. And again, as I mentioned in my opening statements, you know, the issue about housing, we're very sensitive to. So one of the requirements is that they need to provide a statement of guarantee of housing for the non-nationals signed off by the registered owner of the business. And we're very conscious of the fact that we don't want this distorting our housing market or our labor market. As a matter of fact, there's a possible interesting opportunity. So for one group, the group that's in discussions with the Labor Affairs now, they have the possibility of providing housing accommodations. They have some facilities that were used as housing that can be converted back to housing. So for that group, shouldn't be an issue. For other groups that we're speaking to, for example, at CRIS, at the Investment Summit, you know, one of the contractors actually has built social housing in other countries. And one of the proposals that we were considering or discussing was the possibility that if they have time before the actual construction of the project, that they come in and actually build the housing for the workers, and that St. Martin could look at purchasing those accommodations, those structures when they're done, and use them as as entry-level homes for first-time home buyers. I already had an initial conversation with a possible funder locally in terms of making that purchase, so I think it's a good investment. The companies would be willing to do it at cost, so I don't think you could do better than purchasing at cost. So we're looking for win-win solutions to facilitate the reconstruction process, address our housing shortage needs, and try and assure that we're not driving people out of the rental market, either by price or availability.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Alida, for your question. Lyndon Brown, BCN TV. Good morning. You have the floor.
Good morning to the people of St. Martin and to the Prime Ministers. Prime Minister Marlin, you mentioned that the trust fund has already established, and you are asking for the bright heads of St. Martin, the people of St. Martin who are qualifying in that area to apply. Do you have a duration? How long this process is going to take place? And the people who are interested, who may not be qualified, are there room for training?
Thank you for the question. Your question was, how long will the process take? I am not sure about how long, but I know that we are pressing within short, for those vacancies to be filled. Secondly, the second question was, can you repeat that one?
You are requesting the bright heads of St. Martin, and the people of St. Martin who are qualified in that area, and who are not qualified, they will have the opportunity to upgrade?
I don't think so. I think that is a question that we can pose to the World Bank. Again, we're following World Bank procedures, and I don't think that I've seen anything or in discussions that we've spoken about anything about training the individual to take the position. But it's quite a relevant question, and it's something to pose, especially, let's say we don't find a qualified candidate or someone that hasn't met all of the criteria. It's quite a relevant question, and in the next press briefing, I will give you an update on that one.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Lyndon. Stephen?
Minister Ferrier, 8 months after the passing of Hurricane Irma, the parking lot in front of the administration building, old one that is, still remains a free-for-all. How soon do you intend, because you have spoken so much about generating funds for the coffers of government, how soon do we foresee this parking lot remaining, returning to what it intended to be?
Good question, and definitely has been on the top of our priorities. Everything is kind of difficult to organize really quickly, but the frustration with that parking lot with me is also quite high. Now, I know that our Minister of General Affairs has been busy with it, so maybe I can divert the answer.
Thank you, Minister. Indeed, it has been a big discussion, or frequent discussion of the Minister of Finance and the Ministry of General Affairs, so Facility Affairs. There are plans to upgrade the parking lot. So within short, you will see something happening. We have gotten several different ideas of what to do with the parking lot, so the general public should expect something within short, I would say. Don't ask how short, but within short. There are plans because indeed it was a revenue generating resource for government, and it only makes sense to ensure that that revenue venue is reestablished again. And so indeed it does have the priority of the Ministry of General Affairs.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Prime Minister. Alida.
Thank you again, Cedric. Again to the Minister of Labor. You've mentioned that government at the moment has some over 100 permit requests for that one particular project, more or less. In order for you to have arrived to the conclusion that you would need to activate that article in the labor law to issue one-time permits, you must have an idea of how many workers are needed at this point in time, some type of overview. If you have that number, ballpark figure, can you share that with us? And the other part of my question is, you did mention in your answer earlier that the employer or the contractor would have to give a guarantee that the workers leave. And what type of guarantee would that be? Would that be in a financial hold? But how will that be? Because of course you can understand there would be skepticism as to what will happen afterwards. If there is, of course, it would be not lawful to, for instance, hold a passport. But then what then would you do to ensure that the workers leave afterwards?
Thanks, Alida. First of all, let me be clear. So far, from our initial discussions about the group of construction workers that we're speaking about coming, we've only received a few so far because there's a application process, documents need to be certified. We've received a handful so far, but I know that the number we're talking about is in 100 plus workers. What we do know is that there are not sufficient, there are not numbers of unemployed construction workers available locally, because we've done a number of labor drives, we've done a number of recruitment activities, we're doing training activities, so we know that that pool is not there. We hear anecdotally from construction companies that they can't find the labor that they need. Now, when you say we should have an idea in terms of how many construction workers are going to be needed, it's complicated because, for example, some of the construction companies are talking about doing 2 shifts. In order to rebuild in time, they're talking about, rather than just an 8-hour day, they would have a crew work 8 hours and another crew work another 8 hours. So not that they would work over 8 hours, but that they would have 2 shifts. That's a business decision that the developers, the contractors need to figure out, because they have perhaps shorter supervision time, but they have more staff. So these are business decisions that we're not going to be privy to. The other thing is, depends on their building systems, right? If they're putting carpet down, for example, versus if they're tiling, it's a different number of contractors that they would need, different specifications. It isn't the ministry's expertise, let's say, to go out there to determine who's going to rebuild, who's received their insurance. There's so many factors that would impact the number of construction workers needed. What we are doing, as we mentioned, is from a project basis, you need to submit what's your plan. So that will give us an idea of what the duration of the project is. You would need to submit what skill levels you're looking for. So it is really a business decision depending on what building techniques they're using, and these are all things that I don't have purview to. If you're using precast wall systems versus concrete block or poured in place, all of these affect the numbers, and these are business decisions to be made, not ministries' decisions to be made. In terms of guaranteeing, I'm not sure exactly of the mechanics, but what I can tell you is, if your work permit is granted for a fixed period of time, once your work permit expires, you're no longer legal to be here. Then there's an enforcement aspect that is, for example, includes justice. For example, the labor ministry cannot, doesn't have the authorities to deport people. This is a justice immigration task. So this needs to be done in conjunction with them. But I can tell you that when we look at this, these permits are for a project base, that they're not intended for them to enter the labor market afterwards. You're welcome.
Thank you, Minister. Lyndon?
To the Minister of Justice. President, now we are, let me say campaign, let me use a known word. We are campaigning for people on the outside, maybe in the region, in the Latin America, I don't know where the minister recruiting people from. Now, this can be detrimental to St. Martin. People are coming, is it the Minister of Justice has have a way to make analysis of these people? I mean, having contact with the correspondent government, wheresoever, to know what kind of characteristics are coming to St. Martin. Because we are thinking good, but it can be detrimental because we don't know who is who.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. One of the requirements for anyone seeking either work permits or even a residence permit is to have a clean police record, so that will be maintained. In addition, we also have the cooperation with the Netherlands for the strengthening of border control. So this agreement and the additional manforce that we have will be able to provide the services needed to keep the island in check, and also to make sure that those who are not being very productive in our society, that they also immigrate, well, they're deported.
And that same question, there are other people will find other ways to enter St. Martin. What the Justice Minister
Again,
do you know about that?
with the cooperation, with the strengthening of the border control, we will continue to be very vigilant on all fronts, including the water, the seas, as well as the ports, and the Coast Guard, immigration, police force, the Alpha team on the airport, for example. We're all going to continue working together to ensure that this is done the right way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister DeWeaver. Last round of questions, 2 minutes remaining in our broadcast. Stephen?
Minister of Education, earlier on you spoke of the need to see a junior sports minister in place. Is that something that you have discussed with your colleagues? And secondly, you spoke of the many athletes traveling to the CSC Games and netball players who travel to Barbados. You also spoke of the Boxing Association, but did not provide much information as it pertains to boxing. What exactly is boxing requesting from the Ministry of Sports?
Thank you for your various questions related to sport. First of all, my remark was a impulsive remark, maybe, and a personal remark. But it is a feeling that is real, because I take sport very seriously. I think it should be encouraged, further expanded. It will help to build talent, and this ministry has 300 staff, or 250 staff members, especially in education, a budget of 125 million, especially in education, and therefore you sometimes indeed are challenged with sufficient time for sports, and that's how I reflected on the political responsibility for sports. And I think that sports and sports development and sports tourism is a great avenue for economic development, and it requires its sufficient time. A junior minister, however, is not a formula that fits our constitutional model and our democratic structure. It's a position that doesn't exist, so to speak. So there are other ways to address what I mentioned, and I know in the preparation of the new incoming government, I'm sure that the consultations about the effectiveness of our organizational model will further intensify with various evaluations. So I'm sure that we will have a good outcome in the interest of sports as well. Yeah, that's one. I believe your other question was related to the Boxing Association. They have submitted a request. I don't have it here at hand, but they have indeed submitted a request, I believe, to my ministry and also to the Ministry of TEAT. I have consulted with my colleague on the importance. You've seen the debate also about sports tourism in Parliament consultations for budget 2018. And the event will take place, is scheduled for next weekend, June 1st and 2nd. I'm saying out of my head, but I don't want to make erroneous mistakes. We will support. We've held consultations together last week, my cabinet and the cabinet of the Ministry of the Minister of Economic Affairs, and we are consulting to have it concluded this week to indeed ensure that we support this initiative. Yeah, we will be receiving a variety of athletes, boxing athletes from the Caribbean region to partake in this tournament, and it requires its support. Anything that can further assist, as I said, sports development for our own athletes, or indeed the possibility to develop sports as an economic opportunity with regional activities here, should be considered and require support. That was the second question, I believe, that you had, and I thought you had questions about the other things, or they were just remarks? Yeah, they were. Yes, yes, yes.
But specifically, what was requested from boxing to the Ministry of Sports in particular, which you just addressed.
You mean the what was requested in terms of subsidy and support? I don't have it at hand, but it was, I believe, $20,000. Approximately, yeah?
Thank you, Minister. Alida.
Thank you again, Cedric. Prime Minister, you mentioned the review of the hurricane shelters. Could you give an update of how many of the current shelters on the list are actually workable? And how far along are you in identifying ones to replace the ones that are either damaged or not workable at the moment? And what, if any, at this moment, there is a price tag?
Thank you, Alida, for that question. As I stated, we started yesterday, and so far 4 center shelters were assessed. We looked at Sister Mary Lawrence School, and basically the conditions is pretty okay. I believe I'm told that the bathrooms and a few things need to be repaired, and that will be covered by the trust fund. And the Belvedere Community Center also, there's certain things that need to be repaired. Dutch Quarter is pretty much in good condition. Dutch Quarter Community Center. There's a few windows that have to be repaired, and a possible location that was visited yesterday was the John Larmeny Center, and that is a possible location for a shelter, and just a few things there need to be repaired. As I stated, that we have started the process. It will continue next week. Why? Because we have a conference tomorrow, Thursday and Friday, that those all involved with, as it relates to disaster management and recovery process, with that will be attending the conference. So we will resume our efforts starting Monday or Tuesday. And we have a list here of all the shelters. This list was provided by the Ministry of VSA, who have updated their information and have a hands-on approach as to the shelters. So we are busy in preparation for hurricane season 2018.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Lyndon.
Minister Lee, you told us that you went to the United States. You had some meeting with some countries. And what I want to ask you is this. You mentioned also about the Hilton Hotel, which is a chain of hotel also in the region, and they're interested in St. Martin. The big question is, what have come of the Pearl of China? Has it shattered? Seeing that other hoteliers and business people want to come to St. Martin. Tell us, if you have any information, what is the status of the Pearl of China?
There was nobody from the Pearl of China at the conference in Miami, and I don't have any information about the project.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you very much for your question. Is there a follow-up, Minister
No, I
Ferrier?
just want to respond to Stephen's question.
Sure.
The power of phones.
Okay.
It looks like we have sold approximately 63% of the total amount of license plates by now, and that is almost 7 million guilders. So St. Martin is coming back. People are spending money and they want to be in accordance with the law, so we love them. Thank you very much.